Hello, everyone, and welcome to Context. This program is brought to you by the Idaho Humanities Council with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. The views expressed here today do not necessarily represent those of the IHC or the NEH. My name is Johanna Bringhurst, and joining us today is Dr. Sharon Paterson, Sophie Pederson, and Jazmyne Hartogh. Dr. Sharon Paterson's 30-year career has been dedicated to implementing programs that increase college students' success and learning, mentoring students' academics, research, and leadership, and teaching sociology courses on broad topics such as gender, inequality, work, and higher education. Dr. Paterson's passion is engaging students' intellectual curiosity and helping them apply concepts to everyday life. Sophie Pederson is a senior at Boise State University. She majors in sociology and is also passionate about anthropology and psychology. After graduating, she plans to continue her studies in sociology or evolutionary psychology. In her free time, she enjoys skiing and camping. Jazmyne Hartogh is a senior at Boise State University, graduating this May. She is graduating with a bachelor's in integrated media and strategic communications with an emphasis in integrated media, as well as earning certificates in public relations and sports, information, and culture. I am so excited to have these three wonderful women here. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We're here to talk about a workshop for Boise State students titled Sociology of a Pop Star, Taylor Swift. First things first, how did this workshop come about?
Well, we were bantering one day in a department meeting and thought, wow, this is sociology happening right now and with Taylor Swift. And so I mentioned it in a course I was teaching that Sophie happened to be in. And Sophie said, I want to do that. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. So did you partner together to create this workshop?
Yes, we did. We also had another person that participated, Lauren Caulfield, who wasn't able to be here today. But yeah, the three of us got together and worked it out.
So we spent about a semester meeting every couple of weeks to put the structure together as far as what theories we wanted to apply, what examples we wanted to use to apply to Taylor Swift, and what we wanted the students to experience, kind of assuming that the students in the workshop would not be sociology students. So thinking about what we can contribute to their experiences and have them try on a sociological lens.
What were you hoping the students would take away from the course?
For me, one of the superpowers of sociology is seeing things in new ways and also learning about yourself in that process. So really wanting to expose people to that and how fun sociology is and how you can see things in any job and any parts of your life in different ways. And sociology, or Sophie, what do you say?
I agree with that. I think, like what Sharon was saying, I thought it would be really fun to use Taylor Swift as kind of the context for some of the sociology that I had been learning about and that Sharon teaches me about and stuff.
Jazmyne, why did you want to take this class? Why did you sign up?
So it really comes down to I was looking for a class and I was going through all these different types of workshops, and I have had taken psychology and sociology classes in the past. And when I saw Sociology of Taylor Swift, 100%, I was intrigued. As a self-claimed #1 fan of her, I felt as if it was my duty to go ahead and see the concepts that I could get from this and maybe choose to be a fan of Taylor Swift in a different light.
It's interesting, though, in terms of we weren't sure if the students were going to be fans of Taylor Swift, if they would be, maybe the other perspective of Taylor Swift. And so that was part of the fun of using these concepts to, kind of help people understand, what's the draw? How do we see ourselves in relation to Taylor Swift? And because there are a lot of different perspectives on her and her history and her music and her persona. So that was a curiosity that we didn't know how that was going to go. And just to give a context for the workshop, a workshop is typically an in-class experience. There is some out-of-class experience, but it's designed to expose students to a topic. It's a 1 credit course typically. Typically you meet on 2 days during the school year. It's typically 2 weekend days. In our case, it was a Saturday and then the next Saturday. Some workshops are a Saturday and a Sunday, but they're a short kind of exposure to a topic and an analysis.
So, who did end up signing up for this class? Were they all Taylor Swift fans? How did that work out?
I think it ended up mostly being pretty big Taylor Swift fans. There were a few people that I remember that were kind of like ambivalent towards her, and there were definitely not any people that were like super big critics, I don't think.
Very, what's the word, neutral to her opinion. I was in a group of 3 other members, and none of them listened to Taylor Swift, but none of them had a negative thing to say about her. They actually all apologized before we started in case they offended anyone because they didn't know anything about her.
Awesome. Our listeners will know that sociology is not a traditional humanities discipline, but we think of you as a sister discipline, and learning about a celebrity, how journalists are choosing to portray her and cover her, the history of her music and career. That's such a part of the humanities. So I'm really excited to learn in the course what students uncovered about those aspects of Taylor Swift, how she's portrayed. So you explored symbolic interactionism. Can you tell us more about the theories of self that you discussed?
Sure. So we talked about kind of 3 main ways of thinking about the self and how we engage with ourselves and others that I thought were kind of like, they kind of overlap nicely, and you could sort of compare and contrast the 3. So we talked about theory of self, or the I versus the me, which is it's a concept coined by George Herbert Mead. And he was referring to this idea of like everyone having a passive self and like an active self, where the I is this version of you that engages in the present moment and is like kind of maybe sometimes being like reflexive and like instinctive. And then the me is more like reflecting on past experience and like making predictions about the future. And then the other 2 that we talked about were the looking glass self, which was a concept coined by Charles Horton Cooley, where he talked about how we kind of reflect or kind of put other people's perceptions onto ourselves, but there's this really tricky, weird thing where we don't actually ever know what other people are thinking of us, and we have to kind of imagine that and then like put it back on ourselves. And then the other concept that we talked about was Erving Goffman's impression management theory, which he created this idea of the backstage self versus the front stage self, which is, I thought, was kind of similar to like the I versus the me, where the backstage self is like kind of ourself when we're by ourselves and trying to like kind of cultivate a persona, and then the front stage self is us when we're with other people and trying to like play a character in a sense.
So how did students relate these theories to Taylor Swift and her work?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time both looking at her music, and that was kind of the benefit of the Eras tour, was we could talk about, how did she see herself, what kind of messages that she was getting, and so we showed lots of clips. The students did amazing analyses of the lyrics in the various songs and made that connection in terms of her identity. We talked some about the impression management that fans have. So what do you do to have people see yourself as a Swiftie? What do you do if you're trying to distance yourself from, like, I'm not one of them, I'm not. And so, how does that dance happen? And so then also having students connect that with the ways that they do that in their own personal life, and not just looking at the ways that Taylor Swift does it, but, gosh, where are you having front stage experiences? Where are you having backstage experiences? How does social media play into how you see yourself and how you think other people think that they see them in terms of that looking glass. And then I'm not sure how that translates into what your experience was.
I'm very similar. I mean, we, like Sharon said, we did get the opportunity to like break it down throughout like the lyrics of each of her albums, necessarily maybe not specifically all of it, but we were given examples that us as students ourselves were able to sit and analyze and decide what we thought each theory could be placed upon each lyric, which was super cool because as you decide and discuss throughout with your group members and other classmates, you do realize these theories do overlap. They do overlap, and they form almost an opinion of Taylor Swift that you can almost grasp, since she is like this entity and this celebrity that none of us get to actually communicate with.
You played a clip of Taylor Swift for the students where she is discussing the media's perception of her dating life from several years ago. And I thought this was really fascinating, her almost looking glass of understanding how the media perceives her and then turning that into art. Can you explain more about what was going on and the discussion around that clip in your course?
That was a section that Sophie taught, so take it away.
For sure. So the clip I played was a clip of Taylor Swift performing Blank Space at the Grammy Museum. And she kind of gave this whole introduction where she talked about like kind of what you were saying with how she had this kind of wave of media like publication against her, not necessarily against her, but talking about how she's kind of like a serial dater and maybe kind of a heartbreaker and how she just dates too much. And she was explaining that she kind of initially had felt really like hurt and like uncomfortable with these like insinuations of her character, and that she eventually kind of realized that it was sort of an interesting character, that even though she didn't feel like it reflected her, it was still kind of an interesting character to play. And that was where Blank Space came from, and the perspective that she was writing it from. So I thought that was just like an awesome like example to use of like the idea of the looking glass self, and like how you kind of start to internalize other people's perspectives and project them back onto yourself.
It's interesting that you say she was playing a character because she did not recognize this portrayal of herself. But then she was like, this is a very interesting character here. I can play that. I can work with that. You also explored ideas of gender, race, class, and feminism. So many interesting intersections between those things. So can you explain to me what is doing gender in sociology?
Yeah. Doing gender is a helpful concept because we often think about gender as a physical characteristic and identity. We often don't think about the ways that we enact gender. And so one of the ways to look about Taylor Swift is the ways that she did gender in various, we can look at it from different eras. So for example, what did doing gender look like when she was younger and beginning her career? Her hair was long and curly, and she had more of a country vibe. And then we can think about the ways that she did gender as she tried to kind of push away from that kind of good girl image per se, but then she had boundaries on how much she could stray from kind of that good girl image, but she was still doing gender in her next tours. And so we talked a lot about the way that we enact gender, not just the way that we have gender as an identity.
How has she continued to explore gender in her work? I'm thinking specifically of the song The Man and how her image has evolved over time, and she's really taken head on those perceptions of her.
Jazmyne, do you want to respond?
I'm ready. I've got all the numbers and details in my head. Yeah, so we definitely see her change from her innocent, good girl persona, like late in the 2010s. We definitely, in 2019, when The Man was released, we definitely see her solidify herself as more of this leader and this power position shift, and that women can do the same thing that men can do. And we see her kind of establish this doing gender roles, especially within the Man song, because she takes the view of the man as herself and acts as if that was her. And we see that throughout the music video as well. She even, when she released the music video, she didn't tell anyone she was the man playing in it. And then at the very end, you see her getting all dolled up to become the man. And that's when you finally see this broken perception of, oh, okay, girls can do that too, even though we're almost essentially looking at like a man's perspective. But we also see that break a little bit as she goes on to her later career. She does amazing examples in folklore where she does both women points of views within her lyrics and then men points of views as well. We see her very famous on Betty, where she takes the position of a 17-year-old boy. And so we definitely see her explore the roles of doing gender throughout that case as well.
How is doing gender also racialized? How is it different for different reasons?
Yeah, we talked about we occupy, we're not just female, or not just doing gender, feminine or masculine. We also, whiteness comes into it, different marginalized groups or different histories, ethnicities. And so we didn't totally dive into, but for example, we were talking about perhaps perceptions of Beyonce during this same time and transformations, and the degree to which folks can be sexualized or not, and how that's an example of an intersection between gender and race, that there's kind of different expectations, different frameworks that are tolerated isn't quite the right word, but there's this sense of like, oh, that's okay, that kind of get away with this and not get away with that. So for example, Taylor Swift maybe couldn't be too sexualized. We also talked about the ways that race and class intersect, because she portrays herself as somebody from Tennessee, and kind of more of a humble upbringing. But when you look into her family background, that's not the case. And so she does have some financial resources and some access to things that are not part of how she does gender in a class and racialized way.
So in the course, you explored how women with different colors of bodies are allowed to express sexuality in different ways. I have to ask though, who is allowing the expression or not? Can you explain more about that?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll jump in real quick and then have Sophie and Jazmyne add. That was part of why we started with the symbolic interactionism and thinking about the perceptions that we have of ourselves and the perceptions that other people have of us, and how that impacts our real or perceived choices. And so it's really norms and culture and expectations, and how we see ourselves and how we think other people see us, and how we manage those perceptions. So we intentionally built the 3 different areas in the course as a reinforcing aspect.
Jazmyne, Sophie, did you want to add?
Yeah, that was well said.
Okay, moving forward then.
Oh, one other thing I want to say about gender that we did talk about is, particularly in The Man and Betty and some other ones, the construct of what it means to be masculine and the value there wasn't really challenged. So she doesn't necessarily challenge patriarchy in The Man. She just kind of shows the contrast of it. So we did talk some about what are our expectations of, if she portrays herself as being a feminist, what are some reasonable expectations? You know, she's just a human, just a person. Can we expect that she will have this activist role? Can we expect that every turn she'll push against patriarchy or whatnot? So we did have a lot of conversations around activism.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, because many people have expectations for Taylor Swift to represent feminism or to be a certain type of feminism. How did you discuss her role as a feminist activist in the course? Or her lack of taking on that role, depending on how you look at it.
We talked about it, I think, in a couple of different ways, because something that's kind of interesting about Taylor Swift's like feminism is that it's very kind of like white feminist, and it's very focused on like having the same, being able to do the same things as men and have the same like experiences as men without having pushback. But we also talked about like I'm losing my train of thought
Nicki
here.
Minaj,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think of what to say. What was the question again?
Well, you're saying that Taylor Swift's brand of feminism can be characterized as white because she has privilege and she wants to exercise more without pushback. But that's different for Black women, Indigenous women, other women from minority groups. Why is it different? And what does feminism look like? You brought up Beyonce before. What does her feminism look like in contrast?
I feel like it boils down a lot to that we see it being either broken down to innocent or non-innocent between the two females. We see the white side of things is more predicted to be innocent, good girl, good guy, very clean cut, like perfect, what you'd bring home to your parents. But essentially, we see the Black girls or other indigenous people have more of a bad girl image to them, and we kind of see that using the term sexualized. We see that Beyonce and Nicki Minaj and all these amazing other women tend to more produce their bodies as themselves rather than we see with other white celebrities such as Taylor Swift. So it definitely goes down to that depicted image of what is good and what is bad, essentially, or like essentially what is a good reputation or a bad reputation.
I think that goes back to what you had said before, Sharon, of when we discussed who is deciding what's good and what's bad. It's complicated, right? It's those theories of self. It's the media, it's our perception of how other people see us and how we see ourselves. So it's very complicated to advocate for something different as one of these women in that space. You also address the idea of the commodification of Taylor Swift. This was very interesting to me. Can you tell us about commodification and what does it mean for a person to be commodified?
Yeah, I guess you could look at it as far as, of course she's selling albums and there's different ratings that are part of that. But we extrapolated that to, if you take apart her Eras tour experiences, the long lines to buy merchandise, the bracelets, the different T-shirts for everything. The cost of the Eras movie is more just because it matches the 1985, 1989 or whatever. And so talking about when can you tell that something is not for sale anymore, and then what things are for sale. We talked some about her connection with Kelsey Travis and is that right to say his name right?
Travis.
No, I'm not a fan or not a Swiftie fan. That how the NFL is commodifying some things and just how there's a price tag on everything as compared to just having it be an experience.
We definitely touched on the fact that because of her amount of fame globally, that it's really hard to draw the line of commodification because it's very simple for people to take her lyrics, put it on a tote bag, and sell those. Mm-hmm. And people will still associate that with Taylor Swift because of her huge fame and the amount of work that she has produced across the world.
We also kind of contrasted it with other fandoms. When we think about the Beatles, that was a different time, but you saw people waiting in line and screaming, but you didn't, you couldn't buy a packet of 200 stickers on Amazon, which we actually did for the workshop. That, the keychains, the everything is for sale now. And, you often wonder what are her calculations for her media attention that might then increase sales, which, can be a good business thing, but it's all intertwined together.
Did any ethical issues come up in your discussion? Is it ethical for Taylor Swift's fans to feel that they own her private relationships, romantic and friendships, access to her private life and time? What do you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think that I don't know how much we talked about the ethics of how fans interact with Taylor as much, but that is an interesting question because it brings up this thought of how Taylor Swift is like, she's not just a person, she's also a brand. Like, she's a brand, and she is in a sense kind of selling her like self as the product that people consume. And it's we talked about fandom and her fans in terms of consumption in kind of a different way, I think, where we talked about, like Sharon was saying, like merch and things like that. But I think there's also this interesting component that we talked about of how fans, which gets back into like impression management and stuff, how fans sort of also kind of brand themselves and try to manage impressions of themselves between Taylor Swift fans, and how there's these things that sometimes in online communities, especially, where you have these little like symbols of like status as a fan, and there's levels of how good of a Taylor Swift fan you are and how much you know about her and how close and connected you are to her, which kind of gets into your question of like how much of a personal relationship fans feel like they can have with her. Because there's this dynamic I've noticed before where people will post on like Instagram or Twitter or X, like noticed by Taylor Swift like 3 times in their like Instagram bio, and it's like the symbol of how close they are to her, if that makes sense.
Oh, this is opening my eyes to a whole new level of being a fan of something. Also, our listeners will realize how old I am, that this is kind of news to me. I am curious, now that the workshop is finished, looking back, what were your big takeaways from the class? What will you remember from the course? Each of you.
As a student who did take the workshop, I definitely have thought way more about doing gender and just the topic of class, feminism, race, and all of that in distinction with what I am looking at when, honestly, any of my hobbies, when it comes down to whether it's I'm looking at celebrities, I'm looking at movies, I'm looking at the people around me, that those topics have definitely stuck to, as well as just understanding that we're not alone, that I think everyone agrees that we all feel like we are different people when we're alone or by ourselves, or we have different personalities with different people. And I think just being able to take this workshop and learn these theories and learn different theories that could present in different people, and understanding that is definitely really important in just looking forward and how I'm gonna take my interactions with other people.
Thank you.
I think my takeaways are, I think a lot of people will say that the best way to learn is to teach. And I feel like that was definitely my experience, because like I'm just a student, and it was really fun to work with Sharon and Lauren on like kind of creating the curriculum for the class. And I think the biggest takeaways for me were, I thought it was so much fun in the actual workshop when we were talking about, there were specific concepts that it seems like people really were interested in, like people really resonated with the idea of the looking glass self. I think it's really relevant and like personally applicable, and there's so many different ways that you can like use examples to like, explain that concept. And I think people also really resonated with the idea of doing gender. I think it's funny because it feels like this really like basic idea, but it's then when you really start to think about how, like, think about in your personal life all the ways that you do gender in all these really small ways, I think people were thinking of some really interesting examples of that. Those were probably my biggest takeaways.
Great. How about you, Sharon?
It's always a treat to work with students. I think we don't often give students enough empowerment to co-create and to try things on and to think about things in different ways. Don't have to always agree, but I always call it putting on glasses. So you put on new glasses that you see the world with, and you can maybe never take them off again, like Devin was saying, but also you can then choose to incorporate those different ways of thinking. And so this class really, I think, achieves that opportunity for students to put on these different glasses and to see how they're connected, how we see ourselves, others see us, connects with gender and connects with commodification. And so I think that worked out really well. And it was really fun. We had a really good time.
It was.
Do you look at Taylor Swift differently now, Jazmyne and Sophie, the fans, after taking this course?
Going into this course, I knew a lot about Taylor Swift. So I had a very open mind, and I knew a lot of the topics and the examples. And unfortunately, everything that was shown, all the examples, I have seen them before and have actually talked about it. So looking at Taylor Swift differently, I would say no, but I definitely went in with a way more of an open mind on the subject of who she is as a person and a human, rather than as she is, or as I see her as my number one, celebrity or musician or anything of that realm.
I think I would say kind of similarly, I don't really see Taylor Swift differently, because I'm still a big fan and I still love listening to her music, but I also think that I kind of do have the sociology classes that Sharon was talking about, where I can't really listen without being oh, that's a really interesting example of this thing. And yeah.
Perfect. Mission accomplished, Sharon.
I knew nothing about Taylor Swift. That was
You did fantastic. I'll tell you
the
that.
reliance on them. It's I know nothing.
I was fact checking you in my head. You did great. You did amazing.
Through this course, you really are trying to make sense of human behavior, thinking, how we see ourselves, how we see each other. I would love to hear from each of you. What did you learn about being human, about the human experience from taking this really close-up look at someone?
I think I learned that it is important to understand that everyone is human. You're not alone, and that those internalized feelings and those decisions you make in your head, everyone else is going through that. Everyone else has those decisions, and they have to wake up in the day and get through. And they're gonna, who knows, go through those examples of doing gender, or go through the differences of race or class that we see presented within our world. But I really think this course just coined down on the idea of everyone's human. So these feelings that you're internalizing and these theories that you're conceptualizing, it's happening all around you. And it's definitely something that can expand outside of ourselves.
That's so well said. Thank you, Jazmyne.
For sure. I think what Jazmyne was saying, I agree with that. I think that it was helpful and really interesting to kind of hear everybody kind of had their own perspectives, but also be so similar in the way that, you were saying, that it's we all go through the day doing the same things and having the same little worries, and the backstage, front stage, everybody kind of experiences that. And that was fun and interesting.
I think for me, thinking about the Swiftie fans and the Swiftie haters, it reminded me that we all kind of get to those same places with almost in similar ways, where we see ourselves in certain ways, we are managing kind of impressions of ourselves, we have these different identities, and so we're all doing the same thing, we're just kind of getting to a different place. So the folks that maybe are Swiftie haters, it's a similar kind of impression management as Swiftie lovers. And so that was just a good reminder in terms of humans, that we're trying to be ourselves, and that we're constantly navigating these messages and just trying to find our way.
That is the perfect way to end our discussion, that we're not alone. We are all trying to do our best to navigate our way. I really appreciate all three of you being here today. It's so fascinating to learn about this workshop, and I can't wait to hear about further adventures that you have. I don't know who's next in your celebrity sociology workshop lineup.
We're going to do a couple more Taylor Swifts. It's an evolving process. So one in May and one in the fall, so still opportunity
Wonderful.
to participate.
Okay, awesome. So BSU students sign up and we look forward to hearing how those go. Thank you.
Thank you.